Okay, welcome back to the Mental Toughness Podcast.org. I'm your host, Steve Siebold, and I just want to encourage everyone to go to Mental Toughness Podcast.org, O-R-G, and when you go there, you'll see a pop-up where you can get a free copy of the Coaching 177 Mental Toughness Secrets of the World-Class book. This is the coaching book I wrote for Johnson & Johnson when they implemented my 177 Mental Toughness Secrets of the World-Class book, which is, a million-copy bestseller, has been for many years, for almost 20 years now. This is the coaching version of it. So for those of you that are coaching mental toughness, this is the book that Johnson & Johnson paid me a whole bunch of money to write, to be able, for their managers, their district managers, and regional managers, to coach all the Johnson & Johnson salespeople in America. So it's a really, really good tool, and you can get it for free. We used to have a hardback version I wrote for J&J years ago, but now we don't have it anymore because it's like 700 pages or something. The thing was a monstrous. You couldn't even pick it up. It was so heavy. We sold out of those a while ago. But we have the ebook version. I think it's $12 normally. But if you go to the podcast and this podcast site, mentaltoughness.podcast.org, you can put your name and email in, and we'll send you a free copy of the ebook. For you coaches, that's a gold mine. There's 1,062 critical thinking questions in the book, 1,062. I mean, it took years to put this together. So it's all free. So go to mentaltoughness.podcast.org and get your free coaching mental toughness ebook. Okay, so let's talk about what I call the mark of a champion. And this really applies, I found, at least in my experience as an entrepreneur, and first as an athlete, a young athlete, junior athlete, and then a college Division I athlete, and then a pro athlete, and then a coach of athletes, and then entrepreneur, and then working with big companies. This seems to cross the spectrum as a consistent thread among top performers, whether athletes or business people or others. And the mark of the champion over everything else is consistency. Let me explain. I mean consistency in behavior, consistency in action, consistency in thinking, consistency in results. One of the things that always blew me away when I started coaching professional tennis players, because I got to about 512 in the world. I actually was never ranked 512. I beat the guy who was 512. That was my best win. He was a guy from South America, and I think he had a bad day, frankly, and I was lucky to beat him because, frankly, he was a better player than I was. But I was somewhere around that neighborhood, around 500, 600, 700 in the world at my very best, which back in those days you couldn't really make a living. Now you can make a living doing that at that level. Not a great one, but some. Then you couldn't make too much money. I didn't make a heck of a lot of prize money, but one of the things I noticed when I stopped, I wasn't playing the best players in the world. I was playing people that were top 5, 6, 700, 800 in the world. And I played some people. I mean, I played Peter Thrupp from Australia, and Peter and I played doubles in a couple tournaments over the years as juniors. And Peter was a great guy. Is a great guy. I'm sure I haven't seen him in a long time. But Peter was the student of John Alexander, the great Australian champion in tennis, and a great player. And I think Peter was 200 and something in the world. And I played him one time, and he just crushed me. It was really a bad experience for me. Still have PTSD from that, but anyway, I'm over it pretty much. I mean, a little tweak here and there. But so my point is, I wasn't playing the best players in the world. And when I started coaching them, what I found was they were not only great, but they were consistently great. I mean, day in and day out. Like any tennis player will tell you, and I'm sure this is true in other sports, that if you're in the top 1,000 in the world in tennis, on any given day, the top 1,000 guy could knock off the number one player in the world. I mean, I think even John McEnroe, who disagrees with everything, would agree with that. On a given day, and not consistently, but on a given day, because they're capable of greatness inconsistently. But can they consistently perform at that highest world-class level? And the answer is usually no. And that's the reason most of us never crack the top 100 in the world, or even even 200 in the world, because we can't consistently perform and at that highest level. And that's why these people, when I was working with Andre Agassi, I remember people saying locally down in Bradenton at Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy in that area down there, I was on a team of people, when I first got down there at the academy working with them. And people would say, oh, those guys, Jim Courier and David Wheaton, who's another player, and Andre Agassi and Malvi Washington, and there was a bunch of players. Tim Mayotte was down there, and a whole bunch of great players at that time. America was just dominating back then. Now it's not like that. But people would say, wow, that Agassi or whoever it was, one of the guys, those guys are, just so good. And I'd say, no, you have no idea how good they are, because they're not just good one day of the week. They're good every day of the week. Now, do they have times where they're better than others? Well, of course, they're human. But they're down. Their bad days are better than most people in the top 200's greatest days. It's kind of freaky. But that's a talent you're born with. I mean, there's some level of, obviously practice comes into play. But if practice was the whole thing, Andre Agassi never would have been one of the top players because he was not a great practicer. He didn't even want to be there most of the time when I was around. He didn't even like playing tennis. Jim Courier, on the other hand, was a practice animal. He had a tenth of the talent as Agassi, but he was an animal in practice. Agassi was born with this unbelievable talent, which John McEnroe was as well. Not a great practicer, but a great talent, certainly. He was born with gifts that, almost no one's ever had before in tennis. So, but the point of it is it's not so much their flash of brilliance as it is their brilliance and consistency. Consistent greatness. It's amazing. So how do you transform that over to, that's mostly something you're born with, I think, but how do you transfer that over to the world of business? Well, it's being consistent in your actions, your habits, your behaviors, and which leads to results. And so consistency is the mark of the champion. So I challenge everyone listening to this to, if you're a performer, you're building a business, you're building a career, whatever it is. We have all kinds of people listening to this podcast from different performance fields, but doesn't matter which performance field you're in. Ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being most consistent in your habits, actions, and behaviors, where would you rate yourself? 7 being most consistent, 1 being least consistent. How would you rate? And be honest with yourself. Be brutally honest. Again, mental toughness, the foundation of which is objective reality. Seeing the world, seeing yourself, seeing your performance, seeing your metrics as they are, as you are. Not as you wish you were be, or you wish you were, or you wish your metrics were. You got to look at objective reality. Things, not your opinion, not emotional, all logic, all based on numbers, all based on evidence and proof. Not magical thinking, but logic-based thinking, critical thinking. That's how you build the foundation for greatness. That's how you build the foundation for world-class success. It's not rocket science, but it's not easy to do. So ask yourself, where do you score? And if I look back, on some of my successes, especially in business in the last 35 years of building companies, we've had offices in 10 countries around the world at the peak of our entrepreneurial career. And when I say we, I mean my wife and I. When I look back at it, there were times when I would say I was a 7 out of a 7, and there were times when I was a 5. I don't think I was ever below a 5, and I don't think Dawn was ever below a 7, frankly, because she was always very, very consistent, more consistent than me. I was always the heavy hitter, but then I'd back off a little. Then I'd hit again and get back off, and that's not actually the best way. The best way is what she did, which was robotic, consistent, just day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. It's exhausting for most of us, but it's really necessary. But if you look at your past and you really look at it objectively and you ask yourself, where do I really score? It'll tell you where you are. Now, most people, how are they consistent-wise? Well, if they got a job, typically, and they've got to pay their bills, okay, they're consistently going to show up. But if they don't, then their consistency is not really good. So you're looking at a 2 or 3 for the average person. If you're a 5, you're probably a multimillionaire. If you have the opportunity to use your consistent performance and execution in something that has money in it. But if you're a 7, you're probably flying your own jet or riding like Tom Cruise, or riding in your own jet, or flying in your own jet and someone else is flying it. But 7 out of 7 is tough. I mean, if I had to really honestly assess myself as an entrepreneur for 35 years, we've had certainly in the top 1% in the world of success, but there are people far more successful, objectively speaking. I think probably if I was looking at it as clearly as I could possibly do it, and if I had to support it with evidence, I'd probably give myself about a 5 across the board. I love to say higher, but I don't think I'm higher. I don't think I'm lower either, but I might be. But that correlates with the success we've achieved, honestly. Could we have had more success? Yeah, if we were 7 out of 7, we probably would have had more success. 5 will put you in a pretty good space for sure. But look at where you are. Now, if you're coaching people, this gets a little dicey because people are very defensive about this. You say, oh, I'm working my butt off. I'm killing myself. Well, the truth is most people are not killing themselves. We did 23 years, as you guys know, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, we did 23 years of turnarounds with major corporations, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline, fill in the blank. We did it with lots of companies for 23 years, mid and low performing teams that the company deemed necessary to improve or fire everybody on the team and start over. And when we surveyed those people, as I've said on past podcasts, when we surveyed those people, we interviewed those people one-on-one, in groups, in small groups, in the whole large group, they would claim to be great performers. 82% of them said they were great performers based on their results. And the truth is, less than 4% of them across the board, according to senior management, were great performers. 4%. 82 said they were. So the level of delusion that people can fall into is astounding. Don't let yourself do that. That's the point. This is not a show on magical thinking or delusion. I've done shows on that, and I'll do more on it because it is the scourge of high performance. It is the antithesis of greatness, of getting what you want. Delusion. Look at what people will believe. Look at society right now in America. People are believing all kinds of things. They don't need evidence. They don't need proof. They just believe it because they want to believe it. I remember I used to poll people when I wrote the book, Sex, Politics, Religion, How Delusional Thinking is Destroying America. And I interviewed people that have a heavy belief in God. And I said, why do you believe? That was the number one question. And I did it for 2 years. It was one of the top questions because I wanted to know why people believed in a God. And I never, that I can remember, including with ministers, would get evidence. What they'd say is, because I believe, just because that's how I was raised, because I was raised in a home that talked about, it was never about evidence. It was never about data. It was never about any of those things. I was watching YouTube this morning. This is just completely random. And something popped up on my YouTube feed. I was eating breakfast. I like to watch YouTube videos while I'm eating breakfast in the morning in my office at the house here. And so I pulled up this video, and it's this televangelist. And he's saying, this is like last week. He's saying this, okay? This is not, years ago. It's a televangelist. I guess he's a pretty big deal. I'd tell you his name. I don't care. I'd never heard of him, but I guess he's a big deal. And, he's one of these guys. He's got like mascara on. I mean, these guys look like they come from another, planet. But anyway, he said he's seen 3 people during the COVID not shutdown, but the COVID, the whole COVID situation. He's seen 3 people die, and they were resurrected. By a minister, like in the last 2 years, resurrected. Okay. Now, obviously that didn't happen. And then he said, why didn't we report this? This is because obviously people are saying, okay, well, if you're resurrecting people from the dead, that would be something to see on CNN, okay, or Fox News or NBC somewhere. And he said, well, obviously, why wouldn't you have heard of this? Well, the people in the room didn't want anyone to know. Okay, now obviously he's making this up. Obviously, people aren't resurrected from the dead. But the scary thing is, how many people do you think watching that YouTube video, minus myself, believe it? You might be surprised. It's sad. People will believe almost anything if they're emotional, if they want to believe it. So point of it is, going back to it, not to get off the topic, but if you're coaching people, you got to understand that they're going to be, they could be, not all of them, they could be defensive and they could be emotional about it. and say, hey, I'm a 7 out of 7. When I used to coach people one-on-one, I don't do that anymore, but when I was coaching amateur performers, I would get answers like 7 out of 7. Now, when you coach Olympic athletes, the best ones of all were the Navy SEALs. Back when I was working with Navy SEALs for the government, it was a whole project. It wasn't a group. It was one at a time. And I would get a call, and I would work with them for a little bit. And they're very interesting people. I could do a whole show on Navy SEALs. The way they think is very bizarre. It's bizarre. It really is. And they have to think bizarre in a bizarre way to do what they do, because you couldn't pay me. There's not enough money in the world to do what those guys do. But that's not our story. So they're different kind of thinkers. I'm glad they do what they do, but they live in a different world psychologically. But I'll tell you the one thing that they are just amazed me about. They are true blue critical thinkers. And when I've asked them about it, they would say, we have to be. If we don't think critically, we're dead. Because we're going into situations everyone else is running from, including the military. And they're sending us basically in to die, and we come out, most of us. So they have to be critical thinkers. They have to be logic-based thinkers. So when I'd ask someone, I remember the first time I asked one of the guys, at a scale of 1 to 7, a psychological scale of 1 to 7, which they're usually familiar with because they've been trained psychologically. Psychological scale of 1 to 7, 7 being best, 1 being worst. How good are you at hand-to-hand combat? Now remember, this is a Navy SEAL. Those guys are, freaks of nature. This is what they're trained to do. They're trained killers. Is what they are. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for them because they're military. It's what they do. This is, what the average answer is? These are some of the best people in the world at hand-to-hand combat. 1 out of 7. 7 being best. 1 being worst. You know what the average answer was? The Navy SEALs? 5. One guy said 4. And I said, you're a Navy SEAL? He goes, yeah, but compared to other Navy SEALs, some of these guys are really tough. You just can't, you just wouldn't want to meet them in a bad place. It's just not going to go well. And I'd say, yeah, but compared to the average person, I'd say, oh, compared to the average person, that's different. You didn't say that. See, top performers compare themselves to other top performers. They never compare themselves to the masses. Never. Because they don't think like the masses. They're thinking like the classes, the top people. And that's one of the reasons for their success. Again, a whole other show just on that topic. But so just to wrap this in a bow, when you're coaching people and you ask them the 7 out of 7 question in terms of their consistency, don't be surprised if they give you an answer of 6 out of 7 and they're a 2 or a 3. And it's not that they're lying. They believe it. It's just one of those things. Emotional creatures will be delusional. So you've got to coach them around and say, all you really have to say, you don't have to get any big, argument with them. You just say, I'd like some evidence and data to back that up. What would you have to back that up? I want to see your practice schedule. I want to see everything that you're so consistent in, including your wins and losses, or your wins, I should say, your victories or your successes. I'd like to see those laid out on paper. If they can't do it, of course, they'll never come up with it. Never happen. It's like the evidence that the 2020 election was stolen. Oh, we're still waiting for the evidence. Oh, Giuliani, it's coming. It's not coming because it doesn't exist. Come on. But millions of people believe it. They're gullible. When I see evidence, I'll believe it. When someone resurrects a dead person and I see it, I'll believe it. I'll see evidence, I'll believe it. Until then, it's BS. Come on, grow up, right? This is the real world. Mental toughness this is not, remember, if it sounds like I'm being really tough and I'm using examples that might be offensive, get used to it. This is mental toughness. This is not Club Med. This is why mental toughness builds champions. It builds championship teams. It builds Navy SEALs teams. It builds multimillionaires, because this is when you look at things the way they are. And sometimes it's ugly. But it still has to be mastered. It still has to be won. The day still has to be won. The SEALs still have to come through, okay? You still have to build the business, even if it gets ugly, all right? And it gets really tough. You still have to win the sport if you're an professional athlete or Olympic athlete. That's the welcome to the world. It's a really tough place. And if you want to win, you're going to have to be tougher. And that's no easy trick. And that's why mental toughness means something to people that want to win. It doesn't mean anything to the masses. They could care less. They're not worried about it, and that's fine. But for people that want to win at a big level, this is everything. This is what makes or breaks you. So when you're coaching someone, don't be surprised if you need evidence. If they give you a slack answer, you say, I'd like to see some evidence to back it up, because as your coach, as an outsider, here's what I see. You're a 3, you're a 2, and back up when you say it, because they're probably going to take a swing at you. It's happened to me more than once. So, but you're waking them up, and that's part of the job of a mental toughness success coach. You got to wake people up. They don't always like it. So if you need their approval, get another job. Because it's not usually there. Sometimes they hate you until they win, and then they love you. Vince Lombardi was probably the greatest example in football history. They hated Lombardi. I've worked with people that played on that team as a speaker years ago. A lot of those guys are dead now, but when they played for Lombardi, I'd say, how did you like Lombardi? He was the greatest coach of all time. They'd say, we hated him. We hated Lombardi. He was I won't say the names because but they didn't like him, obviously. He was a tough guy. But when they were the world champions, or not world champions, but the Super Bowl champions, they loved him. He did what it took to win. He didn't do what it took to get approval. So don't go for approval. Go for the victory. Consistency is the mark of the champion. And with that, again, I want to wrap up the podcast by saying, get that coaching book. That thing took years to write for Johnson & Johnson. You get it for free, mentaltoughnesspodcast.org, and you can put your name and email, and you get a free copy immediately. It'll be, you'll get it on over a PDF. And you're going to love it. It's fantastic. Great coaching tool. You're going to print out a lot of pages, but it's going to be worth it. There's nothing like that in the world out there. Believe me, it's been out for a while, and there's nothing ever been written like that. It's a coaching manual for coaching mental toughness, and at Johnson & Johnson, a big corporation. So it's been very successful. So with that, thank you again for listening to the podcast. Stay tough out there. We'll see you next week.